Beyond the precincts of Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut continued the architectural legacy left by Amenhotep I, adding further grandeur to the monumental landscape of Thebes that served as the stage for royal authority. From her southern gateway at Hatshepsut, she established a new ceremonial axis, linking the temple of Amun to a sanctuary dedicated to his consort, the goddess Mut, and extending further to a new chapel housing the divine Embark at Amun's southern sanctuary. To imbue this newly established processional route with ritual significance, Hatshepsut's religious advisors introduced a yearly celebration during which Amun's sacred image was transported from Hatshepsut to Luxor for a time of ceremonial repose. During the festival, Amun of Opet would also cross the Nile to visit the West Bank, where a small temple had been constructed by Hatshepsut specifically for his reception. This created another sacred route of movement. With the existing beautiful festival of the valley already linking Hatshepsut with Deir el-Bahari, these ceremonial pathways came to define the sacred geography of Thebes. The city, in its entirety, was consecrated to Amun through the dedicated efforts of his devoted daughter. Among Hatshepsut's many building projects, none received greater attention than her temple at Deir el-Bahari. The site, already closely associated with Hathor, likely held special significance for a female pharaoh. Its position directly across from Hatshepsut's new southern gateway at Hatshepsut added an additional layer of symbolic meaning. Such a prominent and meaningful location warranted a structure of exceptional character. What Hatshepsut and her architects achieved over 13 years at Deir el-Bahari remains one of ancient Egypt's most extraordinary architectural accomplishments. Even today, its singular design commands admiration. Its sheer scale and majesty reflect precisely the impression its royal patrons sought to make. Though originally intended as a ceremonial resting place for Amun-Saray's bark shrine during the beautiful festival of the valley, the temple also featured shrines to Anubis, Hathor, and Ra. Additionally, it housed a series of chapels designed for the ongoing observance of her own mortuary cult, alongside that of her father, Thutmose I. This one structure aimed to encapsulate every facet of royal ideology. The temple was constructed in a sequence of expansive terraces, set dramatically against a towering cliff face. While inspired by the nearby temple of Mentuhotep II, Hatshepsut's temple surpassed it in every regard, establishing her as the herald of a new era. A causeway connected the main sanctuary to a valley temple located more than half a mile to the east. The final 500 yards of this processional path were lined with over 100 sphinxes bearing Hatshepsut's likeness. Within the temple itself, monumental statues depicted the ruler in various roles. Behind the columned facades of each terrace, intricately carved and painted reliefs narrated important events from her life. These included her divine conception, her selection as heir, her coronation, the transportation of her obelisks to Hatshepsut, and perhaps most famously, the 1463 expedition to the legendary land of Punt. This journey brought back exotic goods for Amun-Ra, and its portrayal in the temple includes vivid depictions of African terrain, the unique stilt houses of the Puntites, and their corpulent queen. These artistic and architectural elements capture the spirit of creativity, energy, and ambition that marked Hatshepsut's reign. One particularly unusual element of Hatshepsut's reign was the extraordinary favor shown to her most loyal servant, Senenmut. Originating from modest beginnings, Senenmut rose through the ranks during Hatshepsut's regency to become a central figure in her administration. As the tutor to her daughter, he was granted rare access to the royal household's innermost circles. In his role as overseer of the audience chamber, he had significant influence over who was permitted to meet with the regent. Furthermore, as steward of the queen's estates, he managed vast economic responsibilities. These combined roles made him by far the most powerful courtier in her service. Senenmut appeared to possess a strong affinity for the arts, a trait evident in the sheer volume, craftsmanship, and variety of statues that survive in his name. Recognizing his talents, Hatshepsut elevated him to the prestigious positions of overseer of all the king's works and chief architect. In these roles, he was responsible for the design and execution of major royal projects, including the carving and transportation of the obelisks at Hatshepsut and the creation of the grand temple known as the Holy of Holies. Among the many rewards he received, One of the most remarkable was the royal authorization to include his own devotional imagery in sacred spaces such as Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut, and various temples throughout Upper and Lower Egypt. At Deir el-Bahari in particular, he was even depicted within the upper sanctuary. For a non-royal individual to appear in the most sacred part of a temple was not merely rare. Senenmut was also granted the right to construct an expansive funerary complex, the largest of its kind at the time. This included a public chapel for his cult and a private tomb chamber, which extended beneath the sacred precinct at Deir el-Bahari. His burial chamber featured a stone sarcophagus, a privilege typically reserved for royalty. These extraordinary honors inevitably sparked rumors among his envious peers, who questioned the nature of his relationship with Hatshepsut. One Theban laborer went so far as to depict these speculations in a crude and sexually suggestive graffito. Ironically, Senenmut's fortunes did not rise further after Hatshepsut's assumption of full kingship. He was removed from his role as the princess's tutor and eventually vanished from official records. Whether this disappearance resulted from disgrace, retirement, or natural death is unknown. What is certain is that he never married and left behind no descendants. Although Hatshepsut may have harbored hopes during her more ambitious moments that her daughter would succeed her, such a succession from mother to daughter would have stretched the traditional concept of kingship beyond its limits. Ultimately, the throne passed to her stepson, nephew, and son-in-law, Thutmose III, who had spent nearly 15 years as a junior co-regent before becoming sole ruler in 1458. Regardless of his personal sentiments toward his stepmother, he clearly shared her admiration for Thutmose I. Inspired by his grandfather's vigor, Thutmose III embarked on a determined mission to secure and expand his imperial inheritance. Barely 10 weeks after assuming full power, Thutmose led his army on his first military campaign into the Near East. Part of this was a personal bid to establish himself as a courageous and capable leader, echoing the achievements of his grandfather. But there was also an urgent political motive. While Hatshepsut's reign had focused on domestic architectural projects, Egypt's foreign adversaries had grown bolder. The kingdom of Mitanni, previously subdued by Thutmose I, had regained strength and was inciting rebellion among a coalition of Asiatic rulers. Chief among them was the Prince of Kadesh, who, along with key allies, had fortified himself in the city of Megiddo. Megiddo held critical importance. It controlled the Jezreel Valley, the main north-south artery through northern Canaan, and the easiest route connecting the Jordan Valley with the Mediterranean coast. Egypt could not afford to ignore this threat. A preemptive strike was the only viable option. In late winter of 1458, Thutmose III departed with his elite corps of 10,000 men, marching through the border fortress of Chara en route to Megiddo. After 9 days, the force reached Gaza, where they spent the night among allies. However, rest was brief. They set off again at dawn, driven by resolve and ambition. After 11 more days of crossing unfamiliar and potentially hostile lands, they arrived at Yem. There, the king convened a war council. From Yem, 3 routes led to Megiddo, one to the north, another to the south, and a third through the narrow Aruna Pass. Despite opposition from his generals, the king advocated for the Aruna route. Whether by intuition or strategy, the choice proved brilliant. As the Egyptian army advanced through the confined pass, with Thutmose personally leading the way, they encountered no resistance. The enemy had positioned their forces along the northern and southern roads, never anticipating that the Egyptians would dare the narrow pass. Once the entire army had safely emerged from the defile, they moved forward and made camp beside the Chena Brook, just outside Megiddo, early in the afternoon. On the eve of battle, Thutmose, much like Shakespeare's Henry V before Agincourt, rallied his men with words of resolve: "Be steadfast, be steadfast. Be vigilant, be vigilant." At sunrise on April 27th, the king made a dramatic entrance among his infantry, standing tall in a chariot made of electrum, dressed in gleaming armor. The brilliance of his appearance was meant to uplift the spirits of his troops and instill fear in the enemy. The opposing forces broke into a panicked retreat, rushing back toward Megiddo in terror. In their desperation, they abandoned their horses and luxurious chariots, scrambling to be pulled up into the safety of the city by their garments. However, the Egyptian soldiers, swept up in the chaos and temptation, lost their discipline. Rather than pursuing their advantage and seizing Megiddo before the city could organize its defenses, they became distracted by looting the spoils left behind on the battlefield. Because of this lapse, the opportunity for a swift victory vanished, and the Egyptians had to prepare for a drawn-out siege. To begin the assault, some soldiers were tasked with measuring the city's fortifications, while others cleared the nearby orchards. Soon, the Egyptians had encircled Megiddo with a wooden barricade and dug a surrounding trench to isolate the city completely. As the siege wore on and supplies dwindled, some of the desperate inhabitants emerged and surrendered, receiving clemency in return. The Prince of Kadesh and his allies could only hold out so long. In time, they too conceded defeat, crawling on their bellies to bow before the king, pleading for mercy and the chance to breathe under his rule. Their surrender was just the beginning. Thutmose appointed loyal governors over the conquered towns, confiscated the territories, and incorporated them into the royal domain. The fertile lands of the Megiddo plain, now under Egyptian control, produced rich harvests that, along with regular tribute from across the Near East, bolstered Egypt's wealth and affirmed its dominance. The spoils of the Megiddo campaign were vast: thousands of horses and chariots, herds of cattle, goats, and sheep, as well as a large number of slaves, including women, children, and even the consorts of enemy leaders. This battle marked the most consequential military triumph of Thutmose III's reign and secured Egyptian supremacy over the region east of the Jordan for centuries to come. Beyond the formal records of Thutmose III's campaigns, the aftermath of the Battle of Megiddo had profound human implications. Egyptian troops returned not only with material spoils, but also with foreign women, some of whom became wives or concubines. These captives, brought back to the Nile Valley, had a lasting impact on Egyptian society. As they gradually assimilated into local communities, they contributed to turning New Kingdom Egypt into a truly cosmopolitan society. Egypt had always been a cultural crossroads, where Mediterranean and African influences mingled and enriched one another. From the earliest times, it had accepted outsiders, provided they embraced Egyptian customs and ways of life. Even during the Pyramid Age, when national pride was at its height, it wasn't unusual for a native of Memphis to encounter a shipbuilder from Byblos or a Nubian soldier serving under an Egyptian name. However, the influx of foreigners resulting from Thutmose III's military ventures was on an entirely different scale. Many towns and cities in Egypt became home to significant foreign communities, and these newcomers quickly seized the opportunities available to them. One notable example was a former prisoner of war named Pabal, who rose through the ranks to become chief architect at the Temple of Ammonius. Even the royal court began to reflect this shift in attitude. Among the spoils brought back from the Near East were 3 Syrian women who won the king's affection. One of them, Manuai, bore a name derived from an Amorite term meaning to love. Her companions were Mahata and Maryuta, the latter a name related to the Hebrew word for lady. Thutmose lavished them with extravagant gifts: gold jewelry, beaded ornaments, diadems set with precious gems, and exquisite metal and glass vessels. Remarkably, less than a century after the expulsion of the foreign Hyksos rulers, Asiatic women were now part of the Egyptian royal harem. Following his triumph at Megiddo, Thutmose III embarked on 16 additional campaigns in the Near East over the next 20 years, averaging nearly one a year. While many of these expeditions were more about maintaining dominance and collecting tribute from loyal princes than engaging in full-scale war, a few operations had more strategic aims. One persistent challenge was the city-state of Tunip in northern Syria. Thutmose launched 3 successive campaigns against it. Targeting Tunip's coastal allies, he conquered them, captured their leaders, and converted their harbors into fortified bases to support the Egyptian military. Through steady effort, Egypt was not merely demonstrating power but extending real control, slowly absorbing territory across the Near East. While Thutmose I had been content to show strength, his grandson was committed to holding and governing what he had won. Thutmose III was not above seizing the opportunity for a powerful propaganda moment. On his 8th campaign, He chose to reaffirm and surpass the legacy of his grandfather by marching all the way to the frontiers of Mitanni. Just as the army had done 2 generations earlier, the Egyptian forces traveled by sea from the Nile Delta to Kebni. There, they cut timber and constructed ships, which they then dragged overland until reaching the banks of the Euphrates River. Having bravely crossed the sweeping curve of Nahran at the head of his troops, Thutmose encountered a Mitannian army unprepared for battle. Their king had fled, and the nobles took shelter in nearby caves to escape the Egyptian assault, which left the surrounding towns and villages in ruins. Interpreting their retreat as an admission of defeat, Thutmose had his victory commemorated on a stela erected beside the triumphal inscription of Thutmose I. It was a deliberate echo of past glories. To complete this dramatic display, he traveled to Nai, where he killed 120 elephants, mirroring the feat of his grandfather. He also made time to visit Katna's renowned bow-making workshops and even engaged in a hunting expedition, before collecting further tribute from local rulers and returning to Egypt. The entire operation took 5 months. The success did not go unnoticed. Egypt's rivals and allies were quick to send gifts and tributes. Babylonia offered lapis lazuli, while the Hittites sent silver, precious stones, and timber. Emissaries from Assyria also brought their tribute, followed soon after by delegations from Ashua on the Ionian coast and from Tanaya, which provided silver and rare iron. Egypt's prestige had reached new heights, and Thutmose III, the warrior king, was celebrated and admired across the region. One final matter remained unresolved: Nubia. Where sheer military strength had failed to suppress Kushite resistance, Thutmose tried a more strategic approach. The city of Kerma had been rebuilt time and again by its loyal inhabitants. Instead of destroying it, Thutmose founded a new Egyptian town right next to it. Attracted by the prospects of trade and employment, the people of Kerma gradually migrated to the new settlement. Deprived of economic life, the old city, once a symbol of Kushite identity, faded into obscurity. Rather than executing the local chiefs, Thutmose brought them and their families to Egypt. There they were immersed in Egyptian culture before being sent back home to govern their territories as loyal administrators of the pharaoh. Although Egypt's control over Kush never equaled its grip on Wawat to the north, this diplomatic policy proved effective. Serious rebellion ceased, and peace was maintained throughout the new kingdom. During his reign, Thutmose III earned a reputation as the king who extends his borders to the edge of the world, to the marshlands of Nahran. To later generations, he would be remembered as one of the greatest pharaohs in all of Egypt's long history. Thutmose III's military triumphs abroad feature prominently in historical records from his reign, and they continue to shape how we view his legacy over 3 millennia later. However, despite spending extended periods away on campaigns, he could not afford to ignore the internal affairs of Egypt. The kingdom spanned a vast territory, with deeply rooted local and regional traditions. The threat of decentralization always lingered just beneath the surface. Twice before in Egypt's past, the lack of a strong centralized authority had led to political fragmentation, civil strife, and vulnerability to foreign invasion. For the early rulers of the 18th dynasty, including Ahmose and Amenhotep I, the priority had been to restore stability after a period of turmoil. Ambitions beyond Egypt's borders were a luxury they couldn't yet afford. That Thutmose III could channel his considerable energy into expanding Egypt's frontiers was not only a result of his own talents, but also a reflection of the robust governmental reforms his predecessors had established. These reforms had consolidated royal authority while allowing the pharaoh to delegate the routine demands of governance. Although the king was the ultimate authority, much of the administration was handled by a select group of trusted officials. These powerful men, who wielded both influence and wealth, governed the country on his behalf. While Egypt had once accepted a female monarch, the upper echelons of power remained dominated by men. These high-ranking officials often commissioned lavishly decorated tombs in the hills of Thebes, known today as the tombs of the nobles. Popular tourist destinations, these tombs offer not only vivid artistic scenes but also valuable insight into the complex and often shadowy nature of power during this period. In practical terms, the Egyptian government was divided into several specialized departments. Central administration brought together the office overseeing royal construction, headed by the overseer of works, and the treasury, managed by the chancellor. The army operated under its own overseer, as did the gold mines in Nubia, which were crucial to Egypt's wealth. Governance at the provincial level was managed by regional officials, such as the king's son and overseer of the southern countries, who supervised Egyptian-controlled Nubia. Individual cities were run by local mayors. Thebes, as the spiritual heart of the monarchy, was treated uniquely, governed by particularly loyal appointees in a semi-autonomous structure. Temples throughout the country had their own priesthoods, each with not only religious but also economic influence. Chief among them was the high priest of Ammonius, who effectively managed the enormous assets of the temple at Hatshepsut. Another vital branch of the administration managed the royal household and the estate that provided for it. At the head of this department was the royal steward, a figure who enjoyed exceptional proximity to the king and controlled access to him. Presiding over the entire bureaucratic system was the vizier, who acted as the main liaison between the king and every governmental department. During the 18th dynasty, this role was divided into two, a northern vizier based in Memphis and a southern one in Thebes. Altogether, this sophisticated administrative structure allowed the king to maintain control over every dimension of the kingdom, with his chosen officials executing his will at every level. During the Pyramid Age, the most important government roles were typically reserved for male members of the royal family. However, this approach risked allowing the king's brothers and sons to form competing centers of power, which could have led to instability. By the end of the 4th dynasty, Egypt began allowing men of non-royal origin to fill top administrative positions. This shift not only distanced potential royal rivals from influence, but also brought greater professionalism to the management of the state. By the time of the early New Kingdom, royal males, aside from the heir to the throne, were often sent into military service. Much like younger sons of British monarchs in later centuries, they were given a way to channel their abilities and ambitions into serving the state away from the political center. Meanwhile, within Egypt, a well-established elite class of bureaucratic families had risen to dominate the upper echelons of society. These families controlled the most desirable positions, often passing them down through generations. In this tight-knit and highly competitive circle, ambitious men vied for influence, seeking the king's favor to climb the ranks. A group of 4 senior officials who served during the reign of Thutmose III and his successor offer a vivid example of how power operated in ancient Egypt. Their careers reveal not only the structure of authority, but also the atmosphere of flattery and distrust that surrounded the royal court. Through their stories, we gain valuable insight into the machinery of Egyptian government at its peak. Menkaperasneb served as high priest of Ammonius, overseeing the grand temple of Ammonius III at Hatshepsut. The titles inscribed in his tomb highlight his prestigious role as the highest-ranking priest in the land, overseer of the priests of both Upper and Lower Egypt, administrator of the gods' dual thrones, director of senior offices, controller of the twin treasuries of gold and silver, and overseer of the temple of Thescaumonius, guardian of sacred rites associated with 2 goddesses. Like many elite officials of the time, Menkaperasneb's ascent to high office was largely thanks to his close relationship with the royal family. His name itself paid homage to Thutmose III, whose throne name was Menkapera. His loyalty was rooted in family ties. His grandmother had been raised in the royal palace as a foster sister to Thutmose I, and his mother served as a royal nurse. Menkaperasneb likely spent his early life within the royal circle, and these connections undoubtedly aided his swift advancement through the Theban priesthood. For the ordinary people of Thebes, the 18th dynasty marked the beginning of a new era in public religious life, a sharp contrast to the more secluded and mystical nature of state religion in earlier times. The city became a vast stage for the expression of divine kingship, and the gods, once hidden behind temple walls, were now brought out to bestow blessings upon the general population. While Upper Egypt's peasant farmers still worshipped traditional household deities, these were now joined by more prominent members of the state's divine hierarchy. Chief among them were Khonsu, the moon god, his mother Mut, and her consort Ammonius Ra, the supreme deity. Through the grand processions that characterized Theban religious life during the New Kingdom, this trio of gods became visible and accessible to ordinary citizens. On important feast days, the sacred barks of Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu were carried through the bustling streets of Thebes by priests. Farmers, artisans, and scribes alike could witness and take part in the divine presence as it passed by. These ceremonies not only brought joy and vibrancy to everyday life, but also helped to reinforce a sense of unity between the people and the state's official religious beliefs. As always in Egypt, religion was closely intertwined with political authority. Operating from its base at Hatshepsut, the cult of Ammonius had a powerful influence over every layer of Theban society. According to the scenes and inscriptions in his tomb, Menkaperishkneb's worldly responsibilities as high priest often overshadowed his spiritual role. He actively oversaw Thutmose III's temple-building projects and proudly recorded his involvement in directing their construction. Even more critical was his role in managing the temple's vast wealth, large herds of livestock, extensive land holdings across Egypt, and valuable mining operations in the eastern desert and Nubia. Much of his time was spent inspecting cattle, overseeing the transport of agricultural produce and mined resources, and ensuring the temple granaries were well stocked. A portion of the wealth funneled into Hatshepsut was allocated to the temple workshops, which employed the most skilled artisans in Egypt. These craftsmen produced luxury items not just for the temple, but also for the royal court. In ancient Egypt, temple and palace were deeply interconnected, each reinforcing the other's authority. As high priest, Menkaperishkneb's main role was to support the monarchy both ideologically and economically. This dual responsibility was most vividly expressed during the formal reception of foreign envoys at the royal court. Delegations from distant lands highlighted Egypt's dominance and the king's immense wealth. While Menkaperishkneb ensured the loyalty of the Ammoniasari temple and its priesthood, his counterpart Rekhmira was charged with a broader task, managing the entire civil administration of Upper Egypt. As southern vizier, Rekhmira held a mix of royal, judicial, and bureaucratic powers. He heard the complaints of citizens, presided as chief judge in major trials, and received daily updates from government officials. According to his own description, he was second only to the king. His rise to power, however, was rooted more in his family's influence than personal merit, as he descended from a distinguished line of viziers. Following the principle of Mot, the vizier was expected to carry out his duties fairly and impartially. Upon his appointment, the king personally instructed him with these words: "Treat equally those you know and those you do not, whether they are near or far." Rekhmira claimed to have followed this guidance with great care. Yet the very insistence on his fairness implies that inequality may have been common, and that many ordinary Egyptians experienced injustice under those in power. An examination of Rekhmira's duties offers further insight. In addition to his inspection tours and daily court sessions, his time was heavily consumed by reports from subordinates. Along with updates from the treasury and royal estates, he regularly received intelligence from the head of the palace guard, military commanders, and the chief of security. The attention given to the king's personal protection equaled that of managing the economy, illustrating the authoritarian nature of Egyptian rule. Besides his administrative responsibilities, the vizier also functioned as the kingdom's top police officer, defense minister, and interior official. Rekhmira frequently visited the temple of Hatshepsut, likely to ensure that the high priest was fulfilling his responsibilities. After gathering reports from across the administration, Rekhmira would relay this information to the king during a daily audience. Although the vizier coordinated state policy, the ultimate authority rested solely with the monarch, who had the final say on appointments and dismissals. Despite his esteemed lineage, Rekhmira's family did not retain power into the next generation. When Amenhotep II succeeded Thutmose III, Rekhmira's sons were overlooked in favor of a different family. This abrupt transition signaled a deliberate shift in leadership and served as a reminder to the elite of the fragile nature of power in an absolute monarchy. The king grants favor. Praise be to the king's name. The primary beneficiaries of the new reign were members of a family that held strong royal connections to Amenhotep II, rather than his predecessor. While still a prince, Amenhotep II had been educated by a man named Amos-Hume, who also served as overseer of the harem palace. Amos-Hume's two sons were raised in close proximity to the prince, sharing the same elite environment. Upon his accession to the throne, Amenhotep II wasted no time in elevating his childhood acquaintances to powerful positions. The older brother, Amenemopet, succeeded Rekhmira as southern vizier, while the younger, Senefer, was appointed mayor of Thebes. Together, these two brothers came to control nearly every facet of Upper Egypt's administration. Their loyalty to the king was further cemented through marriage. Amenemopet wed a woman from the harem palace, and Senefer married a royal wet nurse. Senefer stands out as one of the few officials from the new kingdom whose personality emerges clearly through the historical record. Biographical inscriptions in his tomb offer revealing glimpses into his character. Though he, along with his brother, was granted the rare honor of burial in the Valley of the Kings, it is his secondary tomb in Thebes that is better known. Nicknamed the Tomb of the Vines, this sepulchre is renowned for its ceiling, which is sculpted and painted to resemble a great vine heavy with clusters of fruit. It evokes an image of Senefer as a man who enjoyed the pleasures of life, the cheerful mayor who spends his lifetime in happiness. This image is reinforced by a tomb painting and a finely carved statue of Senefer and his wife, both of which include the same detail, a heart-shaped pendant consisting of two joined hearts worn around his neck. The pendant is inscribed with the throne name of Amenhotep II, suggesting it was a personal gift from the king. It clearly held great sentimental value for Senefer, serving both as a cherished token and a symbol of royal favor. Senefer proudly referred to himself as one who satisfies the heart of the king, a phrase that may well have been a deliberate pun. Unusually, Senefer's statue is signed by the two sculptors who created it, who were known as outline artists at the Temple of Ammonius. This suggests that Senefer, leveraging his influence at Hatshepsut, secured the services of highly skilled artisans for his own personal monument. Such arrangements were likely common, revealing how private interests often merge with official positions. Another window into Senefer's character comes from a rare surviving artifact, a sealed, unopened letter he wrote to a tenant farmer named Baki in the town of Hatshepsut, located north of Thebes. The letter served to announce Senefer's planned visit to collect certain supplies. His tone is stern and commanding, as he reprimands Baki with the words, "Do not let me find fault with you concerning your post. Be warned, you must not slack, for I know you are lazy and enjoy lying down while eating." Although Baki may have earned this rebuke, it's just as plausible that Senefer, in his role as the proud and authoritative mayor of Thebes, spoke to all subordinates in such a domineering manner. Formality, prestige, and pride were closely tied to arrogance. No figure within the 18th dynasty's administration showcased self-assured pride more openly than Amenhotep II's chief steward Kenamen. Like Senefer and Amenemopet, Kenamen was raised in the harem palace, where his mother served as wet nurse to the future pharaoh. He unabashedly referred to her as the great nurse who raised the god. In essence, Kenamen was the prince's foster brother, and the deep bond they formed in their youth ultimately proved advantageous once his childhood companion ascended to the throne. Kenamen began his career with military service, even fighting alongside the king during a campaign in Syria. These experiences on the battlefield not only strengthened their friendship, but likely highlighted Kenamen's loyalty and physical aptitude. After returning from war, he was appointed overseer of Perunifer, a strategic harbor and naval base in northern Egypt. His loyalty and competence earned him further advancement, culminating in his appointment as chief steward. This position placed him in charge of managing the royal estate, overseeing the lands and resources that financed the court. His direct duties included supervision of the royal family's country retreat, a role that seemed to suit him well, as it blended routine management with frequent celebrations featuring musicians, dancers, and the offering of rare gifts to the king during New Year festivities. True to his nature, Kenamen's lavish tomb in Thebes was designed with expansive wall surfaces to accommodate as many inscriptions as possible. This grand monument to his vanity allowed him to indulge in his apparent obsession with titles. The walls boast over 80 different designations, though most reflect prestige more than actual responsibilities. These titles emphasize his intimate association with the royal court: elite official, royal seal-bearer, trusted confidant, beloved companion, chamberlain, fan-bearer to the Lord of the Two Lands, royal scribe, and royal aide. Kenneman continually invented grander phrases to glorify his standing: chief among courtiers, overseer of overseers, leader among leaders, greatest of the great, regent of the entire land, one who, if he pays attention to something in the evening, it is completed by dawn. His language grew most elaborate when proclaiming his loyalty to the Pharaoh, acting righteously for the Lord of the Two Lands, pleasing the sovereign, instilling perfect trust in the king, and perhaps most extravagantly, deeply appreciated by Horus. Few Egyptian officials matched Kenneman in the theatrical flair of their self-praise. Yet beneath this bombastic facade, Kenneman led a hidden second life. His privileged position granted him intimate access to the heart of political power, allowing him to overhear whispers of dissent and gossip from within the court. His stewardship offered ideal cover for a secret role: head of internal security and chief intelligence operative. As master of secrets, he acted as the eyes of the king of Upper Egypt and the ears of the king of Lower Egypt. Just as Elizabethan England maintained a web of spies to protect the monarchy, so too did 18th dynasty Egypt rely on surveillance to guard against sedition. Kenneman's relationship with Amenhotep II mirrored that of Sir Francis Walsingham with Elizabeth I, fiercely loyal, self-assured, and fearless in the face of opposition. And opposition there clearly was. After Kenneman's death and burial, the once beautiful reliefs in his Theban tomb were deliberately defaced. Every image of him was destroyed by chisel. The same fate befell the tomb of Rekhmira, the model vizier. These acts of erasure serve as cautionary tales. The proud image presented in official records concealed a harsher reality beneath the surface. The careers of Senefer and Kenneman highlight the crucial role that personal relationships played in advancing one's position under an absolute monarchy. Amenhotep II, in particular, favored surrounding himself with individuals he had known since his youth. In ancient Egypt, growing up alongside the future pharaoh was often a guaranteed path to high office. Being a child of the nursery meant not only sharing close quarters with royal children, but also with the sons of the kingdom's most influential families, all within an environment steeped in privilege and authority. From an early age, Egypt's future officials were groomed for leadership through a hands-on, vocational education rather than through purely academic study. This training had an unmistakably political aspect as well. During the New Kingdom, the royal nursery also housed the sons of foreign vassals. These youths were brought to Egypt to be immersed in its culture, with the aim of fostering lifelong allegiance to the pharaoh. As a result, Amenhotep II and his companions would have grown up alongside Nubian and Asiatic princes, giving them a far more international perspective than previous generations. This broader worldview may help explain why Egypt and Mitanni, enemies for many years, eventually agreed to a peace treaty during Amenhotep II's reign. As Egypt attempted to culturally reshape its neighbors, those same neighbors exerted their own lasting influence in return. During the 18th dynasty, the most prominent royal nursery was located at Ghurab, a lush and fertile area within the Fayum region. Since early times, Egyptian kings had built luxurious retreats there. The wetlands around Birket Keren attracted abundant birdlife, providing ideal hunting grounds, while women in the nearby harem palace occupied themselves with textile production, using flax harvested from the surrounding fields. Ghurab thus became a space devoted to women and children. In this setting, royal daughters and the daughters of high-ranking families learned the skills expected of noblewomen under the guidance of their mothers: weaving, music, dance, and perhaps a little reading and writing. In contrast, the education of boys was much stricter and more demanding. Nowhere was this more evident than in the scribal school, where rigorous instruction was enforced. In ancient Egypt, literacy was not simply a scholarly pursuit. Reading and writing were fundamental parts of the royal nursery's curriculum, overseen by a scribe dedicated to educating the children of the palace. Through the repeated copying of sample texts, this instructor taught students to write in cursive script using pen and ink on papyrus. As the students advanced, they progressed to studying more extensive and classic writings, including the Middle Kingdom Tale of Sinew and, most notably, a work known as Commit, or the Compendium. Commit functioned as a model letter commonly used in scribal education, designed to instill moral values as well as technical writing skills. By highlighting the benefits of literacy, it sought to reinforce the privileged social standing of the educated elite. Any scribe in any post at court shall never be poor in it. Another key text used in this training was Satire of the Trades, which expanded on this message by mocking all other professions while glorifying the scribe's role. See, there is no job without a master. Except that of the scribe, he is the master. If you are literate, things will go well for you. Unlike those in the trades I've shown you, the most rewarding place for you is the schoolroom. Memorizing such texts amounted to a mild form of indoctrination. Yet these lofty ideals masked the harsh conditions of the classroom. Much like Victorian England, ancient Egypt held firmly to the belief that discipline was essential. A proverb from the New Kingdom bluntly declared, "A boy's ear is on his back, he listens when he is beaten." The tough discipline of scribal schools was intended to prepare students for the demanding world of public service. The unforgiving nature of their education mirrored the realities of power and governance. The royal court, though steeped in splendor, was no place for weak or overly refined thinkers. The state valued ambition, endurance, strength, and resilience. Once the young princes and their peers had mastered the Egyptian language, their training expanded to include Babylonian cuneiform, the international language of diplomacy at the time. Egypt could no longer afford to remain isolated in its own cultural pride. The new era of international politics required familiarity with foreign languages and customs. The curriculum also featured mathematics and music, as appreciation for singing and instrumental performance was considered a mark of refinement and elite social standing. Equally vital, especially for a future pharaoh, was an understanding of military tactics. Amenhotep II, for instance, likely studied famous battles alongside his lessons in literature, mathematics, and music. In the masculine culture of Egypt's 18th dynasty, where kings were expected to lead their armies into battle and show courage in the face of the enemy, physical training was considered just as vital as intellectual development. Energetic and athletic activities were a core part of preparing future rulers. Weekly routines included running, jumping, swimming, rowing, and wrestling. Although Senefer and Kenemen seemed to favor intellectual pursuits, their fellow student, the future Amenhotep II, embraced physical challenges with enthusiasm. Towering above many of his peers and naturally strong, he thrived on sports and quickly became an outstanding runner and rower. Yet, it was archery that truly captivated him. During a stay at the royal palace in Chini, he received instruction in archery from the local mayor, Min, who was evidently a skilled archer himself. Min proudly recorded the memory in his tomb, recalling how he once guided the young prince, advising him to draw the bow to your ears. By his teenage years, Amenhotep had become such a master of archery that he was reputed to have shot an arrow clean through a copper target while riding in a chariot. While this account might sound exaggerated, there is ample evidence pointing to Amenhotep's exceptional skill with the bow. One of his prized possessions was a highly ornate composite bow made from wood and horn. Archery, more than any other activity, appears frequently in the art and inscriptions from his reign, showing it was a personal passion. On one occasion, eager to prove his superiority, he challenged his courtiers to match his accuracy, proclaiming, "Whoever drives an arrow as deep as His Majesty into this target shall win these rewards." This rare scene of a divine king openly competing with his subjects offers a glimpse into Amenhotep's competitive spirit. His athletic accomplishments helped cement the image of the sporting king as a key part of royal identity in the New Kingdom. Another of Amenhotep's great passions was horsemanship. Horses were not native to the Nile Valley and had only recently been introduced by the Hyksos, but by the early 18th dynasty, they had become an essential asset of the Egyptian elite. In an era dominated by warrior pharaohs, the ability to ride was a crucial military skill. From a young age, Amenhotep showed a deep connection with horses. He was said to love and take great joy in them, showing determination and skill in taming them, understanding their temperaments, and mastering their training. When he was entrusted with caring for some of the royal horses as a young man, the outcome was remarkable. He bred horses that were considered without equal. Upon ascending the throne, Amenhotep emphasized not only his athletic strength but also his role as a capable military leader. Eager to prove himself a worthy successor to his father, he set out to uphold the legacy of Thutmose III by launching two significant campaigns in the Near East. The first campaign aimed to expand Egypt's empire by winning over independent local rulers and suppressing a rebellion in Toxi, an area corresponding to modern-day Syria. The rebels, perhaps forgetting Egypt's recent dominance, were swiftly defeated by Amenhotep's forces. The consequences for the rebellion's leaders were brutal and designed to make an example. 7 captured chiefs from Toxi were bound and suspended upside down from the masts of the royal fleet. Upon arrival in Thebes, 6 of them were displayed on the walls of Hatshepsut as a sacrifice to the gods and a stark warning to others. The 7th chief's body was transported south to Napata in Upper Nubia, where it was similarly exhibited. Left to decay in the desert sun, his remains served as a chilling symbol of the cost of defying Egypt. Amenhotep's first campaign in Asia achieved more than just military and political success. The spoils included nearly 750 kilograms of gold, an extraordinary 54 tons of silver, 210 horses, 300 chariots, 550 enemy horsemen, and almost 90,000 prisoners of war, among them more than 21,000 families. It is little surprise that major powers like Mitanni, the Hittites, and Babylonia may have sought peaceful relations with Egypt after witnessing such dominance. Victory against such a force was clearly unattainable. His second campaign, carried out 2 years later, took place closer to Egypt in the region of Palestine. This operation targeted a specific rebel leader who controlled a town near Megiddo. Amenhotep had no intention of allowing territory that his father had fought hard to secure slip away in just 1 generation. The result was, again, predictable. The rebellious chief, named Kaka, was captured along with his wife, children, and household. Although their fate is not detailed, it was likely severe. To conclude the campaign, Amenhotep ordered the total destruction of the town's population before triumphantly returning to Egypt, having, in his words, satisfied his will across all the hill countries and the lands beneath his feet. Following these decisive victories, no further military action was necessary for the remainder of his reign. With Egypt secure and his authority firmly established abroad, Amenhotep turned his attention inward. A time of peace and prosperity allowed for ambitious construction projects at home. His name, already known throughout foreign lands, was now destined to be immortalized among his own people.